Hi guys, it's Mark Zickery, Mr. Sci-Fi, also known as Mark Zickery of Space Command, and and here I am in Tomorrowland, Disneyland. Elaine and I have been so busy traveling around to England and France and Dallas, having meetings and raising money for Space Command and our other film projects and TV projects. We decided to take a day off, and one of the table members gave us free tickets to Disneyland, so that's exactly what we're doing. But I thought that since I'm here in Tomorrowland, I could tell you some of the history of this place and some of my history with it. So here's where we start. I basically grew up in Los Angeles, in West LA, and so every year I'd go at least twice a year to Disneyland, all the time I was growing up. And now Disneyland opened in 1955, the same year I was born, so I was here from pretty much the beginning. And the amazing thing about Disneyland, the thing I always loved about it, is of course there's Fantasyland, there's Jungle Land and Frontierland, but my favorite land, of course, knowing me, was Tomorrowland. And it was very different when I was a kid, very different when I first came here, because when I first came here there was none of this stuff in this iteration. There were the sets from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, which were spectacular. There was the Rocket to the Moon ride, which was amazing. You can check all this stuff out on YouTube and Google. And I'm going to just kind of walk through Tomorrowland a little and tell you about it, tell you what it was like when I was a kid and what it's like now. But if you see behind me Star Tours, and all of you know, of course, that Disney has acquired Star Wars, but this ride was actually opened even before Disney owned Lucasfilm. But it's a terrific ride, and here's a clue for those of you who come here. There are many different versions of this ride. If you go on it several times, it has a mix and match quality where you'll go to lots of different locations that have many different adventures. It's got a lot of variety, so one time is not all the times that you've seen it, as opposed to many rides. But this originally was the building where Inner Space was housed, and that was a terrific ride, voiced by Paul Frees, a very famous voice actor who's also in The Thing, Howard Hawks' version of The Thing, as an actor. But essentially you would shrink down and go into the atom, and it was a wonderful ride. Again, you can go on YouTube and Google and find it. But let's just walk through Tomorrowland a little bit, and I'll kind of hip you to some of the different things in here. Now also there used to be a ride that was around here, just behind me, which was the House of Tomorrow, the Monsanto House of Tomorrow, which was made entirely out of plastic. And it was again fabulous. You can Google it. It looked amazing. I would love to own that house and live in that house. I feel very bad that they tore down many of my favorite rides from when I was a kid in Tomorrowland. I think they should have just moved them to Dufferland and kept them. Though I do have the audio tracks from many of these great rides. But Monsanto House of the Future was made entirely of plastic, which is something they touted as a positive. And when they tried to demolish it, the wrecking ball bounced off it because it was plastic, and so they had to dismantle the entire house by hand. So very fun. But I now have a little miniature model of that house, which sits in my place, so in the Zickery Mansion. So, but now we're walking through Tomorrowland, and if you look, let's see if I can get this in the frame. There is a replica of the Rocket to the Moon. It's not the full size of the one that was here. Interestingly enough, the Rocket to the Moon that used to be here, it was originally hosted by TWA, and then it changed sponsorship to McDonnell Douglas, which was primarily the sponsor when I was a kid. Originally it was the Rocket to the Moon, and then it became the Rocket to Mars, the mission to Mars, once we landed on the moon. But interestingly enough, for those who've seen photos of that Rocket to the Moon, and again, let's see if I can frame it up here. There it is. People might think that you actually went inside the rocket to go on the ride, but no. Actually, there was a building next to the rocket, which is still here. That building that I'm panning that's next to it, that was the home of the Rocket to the Moon ride. And you would go inside this cylindrical rocket, and it had these incredible blue plastic chairs and a round screen on the bottom and a round screen on the top and two side screens, and you'd take off for the moon, and the seats would vibrate, and there'd be a rising thing in the seat where you'd feel weightless as much as you could simulate weightless. This is back then, and it was just a dream come true. It's my favorite ride ever at Disneyland, and as much as I like Star Tours, for me the Rocket to the Moon was pure magic, pure magic. You know, my friend Mel Gilden says the golden age of science fiction is 13, and it's true. So for instance, I saw Star Trek. Star Trek debuted when I was 10, and it ran until I was around 13. And again, so that was it for me. For many people who grew up with Star Wars in its various iterations, it caught them when they were kids or when they were teenagers. And that was that was it for them. Now behind me now is this building, very cool. Now what that houses now is actually a very interesting Star Wars exhibit. It's called Star Wars Launch Bay, and but originally this building behind me was the Carousel of Progress. Disney, the Disney company was hired to do certain attractions for the 1964 New York World's Fair, and one of them was called Carousel of Progress, and it showed the world of the past, and then the present, and then the future. And it had audio animatronic robots, people, characters who would give you a tour of what family life was like back then, and how electricity and modern machines were revolutionizing the way we'd live. It was a wonderful ride, and the whole building turned from stage to stage as it went. And again, I'm sure you can find film of this online, and it's well worth looking up. And there's also a very good CD set that has the audio tracks of that ride. And in Tomorrowland, the movie Tomorrowland, they actually sing part of the song of, there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow. They sing that because that was the theme of the Carousel of Progress. But the building no longer rotates, but it's still here. And again, there's an archaeology that you can study with Disneyland that's actually quite fascinating, and you can find the vestiges of those old rides. Now, right now I'm walking toward the Autopia, which is these little miniature diesel-powered cars that are still gas-powered, and they're little putt-putt engines, and it's now hosted by Honda, but it's pretty much the same as when I was a kid, which is very fun with little cars and so forth. And then behind me, and again I'll pan over, is the Submarine Ride, and that's very much the same as when I was a kid. It was, when I was a kid, you went underwater, and they had girls dressed as mermaids in the lagoon, and you would see Atlantis, and you would see mermaids, and you would see a sea serpent. Now they've taken some of those elements out, and it's now relating to Finding Nemo and so forth. But it's still a delightful ride, and one thing that's great about Disneyland is it takes you into another world repeatedly on all these different rides, and it's terrific in that way. It really is well worth the price of admission, and. But again, the submarine ride, and then of course there's a monorail ride, which again is one of my favorites. And when you come to Disneyland, please ask to ride in the front. It's again worth the price of admission. But the funny thing is, I have the kinescope. They released it on DVD of the opening ceremony, the opening day of Disneyland. And Richard Nixon, who was vice president at the time, he and his family took the first ride in the monorail when the park opened. And what they didn't bother to tell him is that every single time they tested the monorail before that, it had burst into flames. So. But fortunately, when Nixon, or fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, considering our history, it didn't burn up with Nixon aboard it. So, but again, Disneyland is unique, and Walt Disney had an incredible vision. And I'm so glad. Disney was a huge person who he very much believed in a positive future, just like what I'm doing with Space Command and what Star Trek did for me. But Tomorrowland was also part of that hopeful vision that formed me as a child, and Walt Disney was smart enough not to see that just Fantasyland would just be a world of fantasy. It wouldn't take you into actions you could physically take in the real world. Jungle Land and Frontierland were looking backward toward colonialism, imperialism, and the Old West. And interestingly enough, the Jungle Cruise is inspired by the African Queen, which Disney did not own or make. But he also saw that Tomorrowland would be a place where you could say, here's a future we can build, here's a future we can live in if we're brave enough and put enough hard work in. And that was an admirable message. And he also, in his TV shows, did many TV shows focusing on travel to the moon, travel to Mars. And Werner von Braun, the reconditioned Nazi who had invented the V1 and V2, he of course became a prime scientist in the moon race. And so he had his dark side and his admirable side. But he was on these Disney specials, and again, his idea for a trip to the moon, that led to the Saturn V. And once we landed on the moon, he wanted to go on to Mars. Couldn't convince the government to do it, but he actually wrote a nonfiction book and a novel about that projected Mars ride, that trip to Mars. And it's still a very, very good guide. It's worth looking up and worth reading, because he really did know what he was talking about in terms of those things. So, but this is, but again, I love going to Tomorrowland. It's my favorite place in Disneyland, and I still, it's funny because I still have the nostalgia for that future of my past, and yet with Space Command, I'm creating a future in which we can all aspire and all live, because there's no reason we can't colonize Mars, go out to the asteroid belt, the outer planets, and now, thanks to Kepler, thanks to the probes we're sending toward other stars, our eyes, our senses, we're finding all of these amazing, amazing planets in other solar systems, Earth-like planets now. And if we develop warp drive, if we're able to do that, if we can crack the speed barrier that Einstein set, we can go to those planets, we can live on them. There are amazing days and years and centuries ahead of us. So that's it for now. Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi from Tomorrowland. Look forward to talking to you again real soon. And in the next video, I'll talk about all the amazing things that are happening with Space Command and Better Angels, the new company we're launching, the umbrella company over Space Command Studios. Tell you lots about it. It's going to be amazing the next year or two. Take care. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.